Hello, everyone. It's been a little while that I connected here on video, and I wanted to jump back in. After my 100 days of video, I was all talked out, and then I went away for 2 weeks, and I'm coming back and slowly integrating back into my life, and actually, I miss you guys and wanted to connect. What's really been happening for me lately, what I am working on is that I'm thinking a lot about our relationships and my relationships in particular, and how difficult it is to actually be in intimacy, because we all want intimacy, we all want a connection, and yet what I am realizing is that to be in intimacy, in order to get intimacy, we need to be ready to be in intimacy. And what I'm finding is that most people find it a really, really difficult to go deeper, to go and be vulnerable and be in relationships in intimacy. And I am certainly not judging. I am really thinking more about what does it mean for me, the way I show up for relationships, and my invitation for others, of course, has to come from a place where I am showing up in vulnerability. So I'm still learning, obviously, although I'm a coach, it's always easier to see the dynamics in other people. For me, it's still, I'm still learning, and I certainly will be learning for the rest of my life. So another thing that is interesting that's happening at this moment is that I am taking a course with unshaming, a course of unshaming with David Bendrick and Simone Soul. And it's making me realize that I'm already working a lot on unshaming on my own, and it's taking me deeper because there are still some things that I wasn't able to see on my own. And so listening to all these examples and all these cases gives me a wonderful opportunity to start unshaming not only myself, but my shaming tendencies toward others. So what I'm understanding now is that anytime we shame someone else to something is something that we haven't accepted in ourselves. Just like when we admire something in someone else is something that we admire, or need to admire, or don't see enough in ourselves. What's happened to me in the last several weeks is that I did something that was uncharacteristic to the way I used to be, the good girl, the perfect one, the one that always chose attachment over authenticity. So I was choosing relationships over my own right to speak truthfully, defend my boundaries, express my needs. I'm learning to do that in all of my relationships with my siblings, with my family members, with my husband, and yet, there are still some other relationships where I sometimes find it harder to do. And so during my voyage, there was an instance where I found my boundaries. So my boundaries were tested and threatened over a certain amount of time. And I noticed it and decided to not say anything about it. It wasn't a conscious choice. It was more of a habit. I see that my what was new is that I saw that my boundaries were threatened, but the habitual way to show up was that I didn't do anything about it until the moment where it just became too much, and then all of the collected, unspoken, unexpressed resentment and pain, exploded out of me, and it wasn't, and it was a situation that I tried to avoid this whole time. It was a conflict. And what happened after conflict is that, my habitual way of treating myself, once again, would have been, oh my God, shaming myself. I'm horrible. How could I do that? I should know better. I'm a relationship coach, etc., etc. But what happened this time, and it surprised me, and I'm actually celebrating myself, is that the time of shaming was relatively short-lived, where what happened instead is I started celebrating myself for speaking out. It wasn't beautiful, it wasn't elegant, it wasn't perfect, but I expressed myself, and I defended my needs, and I defended my space, and I defended my boundaries. And for that, I'm incredibly grateful, because that's really breaking with the patterns of the past. Now, what happens to my relationship with this other person now? I'm not yet sure what happens next. I have realized that I need to be in relationships where I can make mistakes. I can feel safe to make a mistake and apologize and invite conversation of what happens now. Invite conversation where I can explain what happened, where I can discuss, I can admit a mistake made, and invite a conversation where the other person also has the right to express how it made, her feel. And what she's told me so far was that she kind of implied that I made her feel unsafe. She said, I no longer feel safe to be me with you. And of course, using the term for my group could have destabilized me and could have made me feel terrible, like, oh, this is me, I'm an expert in this, and I should have known better, and how could I do this? And I made her feel unsafe. And then I reminded myself that part of what I'm teaching is that we cannot have conditions in relationships with others where we expect those people to make us feel safe. Learning to be safe is an internal process. This is what my new paradigm thinking is. We've always held other people responsible for our happiness, our safety, our well-being, all this stuff. That's the relationship with a parent figure. When we step into our sense of adulthood, no one is responsible for our sense of safety. Of course, as I always say, if there is somebody who is physically abusing us, we're out of there, and there is no discussion to be had there. We, as much as possible, save ourselves. When it's not physical violence and it's just sometimes verbal, the pent-up energy comes out and it becomes a conflict. We can communicate what makes us feel safe and what doesn't make us feel safe, yes, but I'm feeling quite strongly at this moment, we cannot shame people with whom we're in relationships for their behavior. So I'm trying to understand that what happened with this person, she was just being herself, and my feelings are mine. So I need to understand what happened, where did I not protect my needs, and how can I learn from this lesson and do differently, speak out maybe a little bit sooner so that the energy doesn't become so violent in the end that it comes out with force. However, her sense of safety, although I can understand that it's really, really uncomfortable and nobody should be on the receiving end of our anger. However, we're all learning how to be in relationships, and none of us are perfect. And to expect perfection from anyone, I think, is a lot to ask right now, because I really don't think any of us know what it's like to be in conscious relationships. We're all learning, and a lot of this learning how to be in relationships is through trial and error. So what I'm noticing is that there are some people who are willing to investigate with me what happened between us, what can we learn from this incident, and what can we do going forward so that we live and communicate and relate more in harmony. And not everyone is willing to go there with me, because what happens is that what happens is a lot of people stop at the conflict, and that is why we try to avoid conflict, right? That's why we choose relationships over our authenticity. We choose attachment over our authenticity, because we're so scared of conflict, and conflict feels so unsafe and scary that we don't want to go on. We start closing ourselves and we protect ourselves. And once again, there is no judgment. We're all coming from extremely wounded places, and we're all learning as we go along. But what I am starting to understand more and more is that people who can stay with us through conflict, people who can stay in conversation, in dialogue through conflict, are people with whom we can have intimacy in relationships, because then we can bring to surface all the pus and all the stuff that was boiling under surface, right? And so by bringing it all to surface, by speaking about it, by discussing it, and by dissecting it together and processing it together, we're reducing space between us. And so we can come closer and closer and closer and actually be intimate. And relationships then become that much more beautiful. And then there is that much more trust and safety between us, because then we realize, wow, even when a conflict happens, we can talk about it, and we can go deeper, and we can clear the air, and we can start from a deeper place and continue our relationship from that deeper place, that more excavated place, that with the distance between us that much shorter. So this is where I find myself today, and this is what I'm learning, is that how can we, with all understanding that we're all wounded and that it's all very difficult to remain with the heart open. It is difficult. I'm not saying it's easy, but what I am understanding now more and more is that the people who are willing to play in this game with us, no matter what, the people who are willing to continue in conversation, are the people with whom we can have intimate and deep relationships, and that we all crave, that we all want. We all want connection, we all want depth, we all want intimacy. But not all of us are willing to do what it takes. We keep on expecting something from the other. We want the other to become more vulnerable. We want the other to see us. But it's such a dance. It's such a dance. If we want to be seen, we need to show ourselves. In our vulnerability, we need to say, I'm sorry if that's what, if we recognize that we've made a mistake. We need to be able to stay in the conversation, stay in relationship, maybe not right away. Maybe some space and time needs to occur so that we can process what happened and understand what happened. Because really we are in uncharted territory. Learning to have vulnerable, deep conversations is going into uncharted territory, and none of us are experts. There are no experts. It's all trial and error, because we are learning things about ourselves. I've learned so much about myself through this conflict and the time I took to process. So for all of us, all of you who may be watching and who are frustrated in your life that there isn't a depth, or there isn't a depth of connection in your life, as always, I'm bringing it back to you. How deep, how vulnerable are we prepared to go? And of course, if other people cannot meet us there, well then, then that's their choice, and then it's up to us to decide how we want to continue. For me personally, I'm realizing more and more that I no longer am interested in relationships that are surface, that remain on the surface. It just, you know, with time being such a limited resource, and energy being such a limited resource, I find that I want to be very discerning with how I spend my time, and on what I spend my time and energy. So I'm very, very, very interested in going into depths in my relationships, and I'm very interested to be with people who are curious to see where these relationships can take us. And I am lucky enough to have some people in my life who are in that dance with me. Not many. Most people feel that it's easier to stop talking, and that's the choice and fact that I have to accept. But with people who are willing to take risks in emotional realm and continue diving in depths with me, it's an incredibly rewarding process, and also really, really healing, because we learn so much about the fact that what we've projected on the other person is often not at all the truth. And that's healing, and that's kind of reassuring as well. All right, everyone, this is what I wanted to share today. I'll see you soon.